Hello, my dears. You may be hearing some huffing sounds. That is the sounds of the sheep. Oh, if you're getting to watch this and not just hear, you just saw a nose coming right up. Hi. So much heavy breathing right now. It's hot here. It's technically still spring, but boy, it feels like summer. I also have this little lamb next to me who's our little bottle lamb for the season. She's getting kind of intimidated by the bigger sheep. Hi, and this is my little sweetheart. Hello, do you want to come back? Oh no, you're leaving. Okay. Everybody's heading back out. Yeah, so it's spring, but it feels like summer for sure. It's hot and the grass is really tall. We had one of the interesting features of the short grass prairie is that the grass is very responsive to rainfall. These grasses are different than the grasses of the tall grass prairie in that they can lay dormant. If the rain doesn't fall, which drought is part of the ecosystem. It's a normal part of the ecosystem. And so, yeah, these grasses know how to just stay short. That's literally how they were named. But if it rains, they will grow, and quickly. They take advantage of precipitation when it arrives. So I, again, if you're watching and not just listening, you're seeing a little lamb, and if you're just listening, you can maybe hear her tiny footsteps. She's very wee. She's only 3 days old, and she is with me because she was so tiny that she couldn't keep up. She is one of many siblings. My Finn sheep, which are some of I have multiple breeds within my flock, but one of the breeds is Finn sheep, and Finn sheep have a lot of babies, which is unusual for sheep. But she was sort of a little bit tinier than everybody else, so even though her mom has a fair amount of milk, she kind of couldn't get in there. Like her bigger siblings are pushing her out of the way too much. So anyway, she gets to be our baby, which is also lovely because she's a sweetheart. But anyway, here we are in this grass that even just literally a few days ago was kind of stalled out, not really growing much. And then we had almost an inch of rainfall in a day, which is a big deal in a place where the average rainfall for the entire average precipitation for the entire year is 13 inches. So yeah, an inch in a day is a big deal. And it fell at this moment right before it got very warm. We're having like a little mini heat wave. So yeah, the grass is growing so fast that, around here we joke about, you can hear the grass growing, and it's really is almost surreal. You wake up and it looks like a different place because it grew so much in the night. It is pretty magical. So anyway, if you follow me on social media, then you may have seen that I just spent the last almost 2 weeks in Europe as part of a conference. Or rather, I went out because I was invited to present at a conference, and in London, and to travel that far, that's a pretty epic undertaking, and I couldn't really see my way around leaving the kids for that long, and also they couldn't see their way around it. My son in particular was like, no, you can't go without us, and so I agreed. So I ended up traveling with the two of them, and then my mom, who lives in Minneapolis, flew out separately and met us in London, and we got to spend some time traveling around with her. And I went to this conference, and It was part of something called, and I will put a link to this, because if you are following along with me, then I suspect that this will be something you're interested in. It was called the MOTH Festival of Ideas, and MOTH stood for, or stands for, More Than Human Life. And that is kind of a catchphrase, or a way of indicating an awareness of the ways in which a lot of us humans here in modern time have come to think of the world only from the perspective of the human sort of dramas we find ourselves in. And part of the idea behind this conference, it originally started, it seems like more like a thought experiment at NYU's law school, to start considering what it would look like, because all of us are familiar with the idea of human rights and what is a human right, and like that's a, obviously a long and involved conversation about what that means. But what the original sort of the founding principles of these MOTH ideas were, what if we thought about more than human life as also having rights? What would that look like? What would we think about if we considered these more than human beings to also have rights? And so some of the work they've done that's just so interesting is like, what if a tree had a right not to be cut down? What if a river had a right not to be polluted? And I think the bigger kind of, I don't know if picture is the right word, but where this conference has taken these ideas, because now it's moved, it started out as sort of this legal framework, because again, it was coming out of a law school, is in an interdisciplinary way. What happens when we start creating art, when we start creating economies, when we start just all the different sort of agriculture, the different industries that sort of we consider to be central to human communities and human life on Earth. What if we started thinking about our more than human neighbors? Now, again, obviously, if you've been listening along with me and following along with me, you know that that's the whole concept kind of behind keeping Kith. So it makes sense that I would end up at this festival. But what I wasn't expecting, and that was so amazing, is to, again, meet all these practitioners from literally all over the world. I mean, the group I was in when I was presenting the paper, the paper that I wrote that was called Keeping Kith, that I was there to present, in my sort of little, slightly smaller cohort that was part of the larger conference. There was people from Costa Rica, people from all over Europe, people from South Africa, just really, and doing wildly different work on all these different corners. And yet, there was this beautiful, I don't even know how to describe it, golden light that every person who presented was coming with such this, I don't know, big-heartedness and a kind of humility that honestly I've spent a lot of times. Part of the work I do in the world, the work I get paid to do, is to present at conferences and to be a speaker and a performer and all that kind of thing. And there's always wonderful things that happen and wonderful people that you meet. But as with almost every human undertaking, there's also usually, well, I shouldn't say that. With almost every modern human undertaking, there's so much ego that comes with us. And there's so much sort of like, what is this going to get me? And like, who is it that I need to know? And I have some negative ideas about that, but I also understand that, like, I don't know. I don't want to put it in a negative light. I'll just say that is how most conferences I've attended, and maybe even, sort of a lot of professional gatherings, that tends to be the way they operate. And this felt so categorically different, and it gave me a feeling that I've been getting more and more lately of what else is possible. Which is to say, I think there's more and more people who are awakening to the idea of not centering ourselves as humans in the web of life. And if we recognize ourselves as, important, beautiful, interesting parts of the web of life, but not central. If we start to imagine ourselves as just, part of a council of beings, all of whom are trying to negotiate life on Earth. And that's how it felt in these rooms, where there were all these humans trying to negotiate. How do we take into account the other than human beings who have just as much a desire for life as we humans have? Anyway, it was very beautiful. And also, it was funny because I live my day-to-day life in a place where other than human beings I spend a lot more time, honestly. I mean, I guess with the exception of my children, I spend a lot more time with sheep, dogs, sometimes horses, certainly grass, certainly trees. I spend a lot more time in their presence and hanging out with them than I do most of my human friends and relatives, which is, very unusual, I think, in modern times. But that's what happens when you live in a very rural place. So it was funny then to end up in these very big cities, because we were in London and in Paris, where obviously there's a lot of humans and a lot of things built by human hands, and to feel so in love with that too. I mean, both London and Paris are absolutely beautiful cities, and I could go on and on about, the art we saw, the food we ate, the other people we got to meet, and how absolutely fun that was. And, so often, it's funny, as I'm recording this, I'm looking up and there's this bird, like all these birds circling my head. It feels like kind of proving my point that here, when I'm in South Dakota, I have a lot more non-human neighbors than human neighbors that I'm keeping kith with. But I always say this at the end of the podcasts, or I usually say this at the end of the podcast, which is that I think that our human neighbors are also so important to keep kith with, even though that's not something I do as regularly. And this past time in Europe, where, we were just jammed into metros and the tube and on double-decker buses trying to get from point A to point B. I'm saying we, as in my kids and my mom. We had multiple times where we were traveling at rush hour, and it was like nothing my kids had ever experienced before. Just like that number of humans just kind of crushed around you was wild to them. And anyway, it just reminded me too that keeping kith is something we can do with other humans, and that, oh man, I love humanity. I love it all. We're lucky to be here. So anyway, I hope you all are okay. I hope that you are finding ways to keep Kith. And I will check in again soon.